Hi, it's Michelle Bradley, KU3N, and I just wanted to quickly jump in here today to discuss the 8-meter amateur radio proposal, as well as the unrelated experiments that are going on right now in the 8-meter band, because I need to clear the air on a few things, and I need to talk about um, where things are going with this. Several years ago we filed a petition for rulemaking with the FCC that proposed a 8-meter amateur radio um, allocation. And what we had proposed was a band from 40.51 to 40.7 megahertz. And at the same time, and on a totally different track, there were people who were filing for experimental authorizations under Part 5 of the FCC rules through the FCC's Office of Engineering and Technology, who we're going to refer to as OET going forward here. The first applications that were filed were to conduct experiments into F layer propagation and all that good stuff to test, the ability for that spectrum to be used for lower powered digital communications and other types of communication. And a lot of this was prompted by the fact that there was operations that were already taking place in Europe on the 80-meter amateur radio band. Or actually, I'm sorry, let me strike that. The 8-meter band out there, and they were doing it on variances and other things that have been going on over the years out there. And the idea is that the movement in Europe is to try to get established a full blown allocation in the 40 megahertz range for an 8-meter amateur radio band. Now, the petition for rulemaking that came out of this shop was not prompted in any way by what was going on with the experiments. These were two totally different tracks that would eventually collide. Just to give you a little background on where the 8-meter proposal came out of this shop. I am KU3N. I'm an extra class amateur. I've been a ham since 86 or so. So yeah, I've been doing this for quite a long time. And I am also one of the things that I do here is I'm a regulatory advocate, and I monitor a lot of things that go on in the FCC. I interface quite often with the FCC. I'm involved with many rulemaking proceedings, mainly in the Media Bureau, but I do get involved in other issues that may involve citizens' access to spectrum, and this includes amateur radio. I'm also have a very deep interest in international allocations and international spectrum use and how spectrum is being used internationally and such. And I try to keep up on a lot of that because what happens around the world can also have an impact on what happens out here. So, I follow the World Radio Conferences, the WRCs. I follow the events at the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, as well as their regional organizations such as CITEL, which handles international communications here in the Western Hemisphere. I'm also an Irish citizen too. I'm a dual citizen. I carry two passports. I carry a U.S. passport and I carry an Irish passport. So I have a special interest on what goes on in Ireland and specifically the activities of what's going on at Comreg, which is the Ireland's administrator. Basically, they're Ireland's FCC. And with that, I also keep very close tabs on what's going on at the Ireland Radio Transmitter Society, the IRTS, which is Ireland's equivalent of the ARRL. And a while back, Comreg pretty much put their hands up and said, okay, we're giving up on VHF low band, the spectrum between like 50, we're going to say 50 and like 70 something megahertz. In that spectrum, over the years, there's been a lot of, your land mobile is in there, your lower TV channels. Back in the old days, there was some VHF low band television in Region 1. In that 50, like around that 50 to 72 megahertz spectrum or so. And a lot of that went away. A lot of the television went away with digital. And as the world went to digital television, virtually the entire world stayed off of low band. They completely abandoned the low band channels. In the US, that would be channels 2 through 6. And they favored the VHF high band, which would be 7 through 13 here in the US, and UHF 14 and up here in the US. So what Comreg did was they decided to give a massive swath of spectrum, and we're talking in the tens of megahertz of low band spectrum, to the amateur radio service on a secondary basis. So they had this spectrum to use on a secondary basis, and keeping in mind that there was already activity going on the 8-meter band already. So the 8-meter spectrum, the 40 to 41 megahertz area, was in there. The IRTS did decide to come up with a band plan on how to use that spectrum. And they put it out for consultation. I participated in that consultation and gave some feedback, as and so some of the information in there, because what I'm seeing is because of the propagation characteristics of the low VHF band, we could see some the use of this spectrum maybe for some amateur television, some what we used to call here in what we call TVDX. Remember back in the very old days, days of analog television, when you could turn on your TV here on channel 2 and see a station from hundreds or thousands of miles away. That was during times when the propagation was good, the sunspot cycle was good, you could see that. And so I saw potential in this. And based on what was going on in Ireland, and based on the band plan that they were coming up with, and based on my knowledge of what's going on in the United States as far as spectrum and such goes, I decided to make a go for a piece of spectrum. And the spectrum that we're looking at is in the 40 to 41 megahertz range. Now, that piece of spectrum is currently federal spectrum. It is used by the federal government. The federal government has pieces of spectrum, and then there's non-government spectrum. That's a piece of government spectrum. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of other amateur radio allocations that are currently sharing with federal spectrum. So I didn't see the 8-meter band as anything different. So I went ahead and did a lot of research, figured out, checked with the NTIA, did a lot of research with the NTIA to see what was in that band. And, what we had found out was that a lot of the usage of that band included the military, DOD, had operations down in that spectrum, whether they actually use it or not, or whether it's just used for like battlefield type situations and such like that. They have that spectrum used there. It's also used by the looks like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, specifically the U.S. Forest Service. So it's been used for some land mobile two-way radio for the National Forest. Whether they're still using it or not, I don't know. It's also used for systems like Snowtel, which is uh, telemetry reporting on snowfall. So they have these sensors in these hilltop locations that report snowfall, and that information goes over the 40 to 41 megahertz spectrum. Also, in the very northern parts of our country and up in Alaska, the 40 to 41 megahertz section is also used for meteor scatter communication by the government. And I believe that's also related to weather telemetry and such like that. So there are some uses, whether these are active uses or not. We don't know. Of course, the government is always going to be mum on those kinds of things. And so what we're doing right now with the 8 meter proposal is we're going to the FCC and saying, look, you know, we're sharing with you right now on 440, 420. We're sharing with you in the 60 meter ham band. We're sharing in a lot of places. And this relationship has been fine and hunky dory over all these years. Let's open up this spectrum and make this available for amateurs. And one of the original intentions was intended for transatlantic contacts and transatlantic use, as well as for new technologies, as well as new digital modes, experimental weak signal type of digital modes and things like that in that spectrum. Now, while this was going on, there were people who were filing Part 5 experimental license requests under you know under the under the representation that they would be used for forms of scientific research into um, propagation and such like that. And these started to get granted, and then more and more people came on as word spread through the ham community that the FCC was giving out these experimental permits on the 40 megahertz spectrum. And the section that they're using is the 40.66 to 40.7 portion of the spectrum, which is the ISM, or industrial, scientific, and medical spectrum, which the FCC does allow very low power devices to use slightly higher powers in order, for those specific industrial purposes. And the ISM is actually a worldwide allocation. That is a worldwide use. So that way, equipment that's available in the United States can also be used in Europe. It can also be used in Asia. So that's the idea of that, and that is the ISM pieces are coordinated. That is an allocation through the International Telecommunications Union. So over the years, when you get an experimental Part 5 license like this, it's only good for 2 years. Now, after 2 years, you have to renew it. And what we're seeing right now is we're seeing quite a few of the applications that were filed. Originally, were given grants on the Part 5 experimental service, and now they're asking for another license, and those licenses are being denied. And the main reason that they're being denied is, there's some thoughts on why these are being denied. And I really think that we're now finally possibly at the point where we are at the end of this great 8 meter experiment. See, when these licenses were originally granted, they were granted for experiments in propagation. And I've been monitoring the 8 meter mailing list this whole entire time, and I've been seeing a lot of digital operations. I've been seeing a lot of, some transatlantic receptions and things like that. There's various beacons that are operating in that band. So there is activity there, and there's a little bit of data to go on. The problem is that this data is not being shared with the right people. Because, when you request, the problem is that when I look at these, because I've had people ask me, can you look at this, can you look at this and see why this was denied? Can you look at these? Can you look at this renewal and see why it's denied? And when I look at the renewal and I look at the application, and I look at the letter that the FCC at the OET is sending right now to the 40 meter, I mean the 8 meter experimenters, and it's talking about amateur operations and saying, you don't need this. You have amateur frequencies. Use 6 meters. Use 10 meters if you want to do your experimentation. You don't need this license. That's what they're telling folks right now at the OET. And the OET has been denying quite a few. I see quite a few renewals in here that have been denied by the OET on this 8 meter experiment. And when I look at the applications that are filed for these renewals, they are very underwhelming. And I will say that because one of the things about an experimental license is you need to really have an objective. You have to have a reason why you're doing these experiments and what is the objectives that you're trying to get out of it, and what about the outcomes. The renewals that I did look at, and I looked at a few of them, they seem to all have the same boilerplate explanation that they're using the spectrum because because it's between the 10 and 6 meter band, and that's all they're saying. All they're saying is that it's between the 10 and 6 meter band. They talk about amateur, and that's it. There's no information in regards to why they're in this band, why they're experimenting on this spectrum, why the other spectrum, the amateur spectrum, is not suitable. And also, too, they have given absolutely no information in regards to what they have done with the station in the past 2 years that they had the license. There's no information that was that was provided. And the FCC is not going to just renew an experimental permit. There is some there are some rules that address this. I'm going to go try to find these right now as soon as the old computer here cooperates with me here. And we could talk about these things now. There are rules specific for experimental broadcast, as far as as far as giving as far as giving explanations on what's going on. Like, even in the broadcast world, when we get a special temporary authority, which is used to operate a licensed station at a variance of what they're normally authorized for, cases would be, for example, a station loses some of their loses their transmitter equipment, their power, their final their amplifier, something where they have to run at a reduced power, or because of a natural disaster or other issue, they have to move the station to a temporary location, or the antenna gets knocked down because of a hurricane or something like that. You have to give some explanation as to why you need this to continue on. And I think what the FCC is going to be looking for here is they're going to want to know the reasons, number one, why this experiment needs to go longer than 2 years, and also what information has already been gained as a result of the experiments. And see, that information not just helps get this to get the experimental license renewed, but it also helps in our process to try to get this to become a full-blown allocation for amateur radio in the 8-meter band. We need this data. And this data is not being provided. Instead, we're seeing this boilerplate um, renewal letter that just basically says that we're operating in the 8-meter band between 6 and 10. And, it's, normally amateur radio. Those are the amateur radio bands. And we're basically running an amateur operation. I mean, if I'm a staff member and I read this and it's just telling me, hey, you're just doing this to rag chew. You're not actually conducting any kind of a scientific or academic experiment where you need the spectrum. And if I was a staffer at the FCC and I saw this and I had no stake in this in the proposed rulemaking, I would have probably drawn the same conclusion. And I feel like what we need to do now in the community, in the amateur community, is for those who have been doing the 8-meter experiment, get your data together, get your logs together, get your information together. Let's draw some conclusions, maybe, as to how successful this spectrum is. And then what we need to do is we need to get that information on the record. We need to get that on the record at the FCC. Now, if you want to do that, there's two ways you can do that. Number one, you can send me the information, lpfm@recnet.com. Again, it's lpfm@recnet.com. That's my email address. Or you can go to the FCC's electronic comment filing system and prepare a presentation. Write up a letter that basically discusses your experiences for the past 2 years operating as a 40 megahertz 8-meter experimental station, and exactly what you experienced, the types of contacts that were made, the digital modes that you used, whether it was FT8 or Whisper or something else, log information, the very impressive maps that show, point to point are also good. Your monitoring of what you've been hearing, as far as, hearing the beacons, hearing the other stations, even if you don't make a two-way contact, this information is going to help. And this is what, anytime that you do an experiment, there's always got to be a work product that comes out of it. And that's what we need now. I have a feeling that we are, again, at the end of the great 8-meter experiment. I believe that the time is over, that the FCC is not going to renew any of these experimental licenses, and these licenses will be allowed to expire, as we've already seen with some of these being denied. Now, you're always welcome to escalate. There is an appeals process with the FCC. If you receive a dismissal or denial letter, there is nothing stopping you from filing a petition for reconsideration on that dismissal. And you have to really give facts on why you feel that the OET staff had erred on that dismissal. And then if you feel that if you get denied in the reconsideration process and you have new information, such as procedures that were taken during the consideration of the petition for reconsideration, that you feel that you need to escalate it even higher, then you can do a formal application for review with the FCC, and that would eventually go before the 4 FCC commissioners, who then can, what will happen in these cases usually is that the information, the actual text, the crux of the of the decision is done by the bureau that handles it. In this case, it's OET. And then what they do is they do a draft. They do what we call a circulation draft. And then they circulate it to the 4 commissioners who then can vote on it. And, and that could be, and that would be the last decision that you can get out of the FCC. If you need to go higher than an application for review, then you're getting the district court for the DC Circuit involved, and that's can get very expensive. But there is an escalation process that you can go through petition for reconsideration. But the thing is right now is that in this latest round of renewals, the FCC is pretty much, from what I can see, is denying them all. I don't see any I don't see any that have been recent. I think the last grant that I saw was 2 years ago. So I hate to say it, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think the great 8-meter experiment is going to be over here before you know it. So what we need to do is, we need to pack up our bags, get our information together, and get it on the public record. Get it on the public record as soon as you can get the information together, because this is what's going to help us get an allocation, because this is going to tell the FCC, and it's also going to tell the NTIA that that the spectrum was used and that there was a need for it and that it did a lot of good things during that time that you had that ride on the 8-meter band. We got to put this all together in order to strengthen our case for a more permanent allocation in the 8-meter band. So yeah, it's simple as that. What more can I say? If you have any questions or comments, put them down below. Please subscribe to this channel. And if you need to email me for any reason, or if you've got those reports that you want to send me, lpfm@recnet.com. All right, thanks for watching.